Well, aren't you just sure of yourself, cocky bastard? The somewhat disheveled leader said, a growl starting to emerge from his throat, as all of the individuals standing around them began to bare their teeth, Foster's eyes darting around between them rapidly, as she could see their teeth and nails beginning to grow. Foster looked very, very concerned, gritting her teeth, trying her best to keep her eyes on as many of them as she possibly could, whilst Hamilton remained absolutely unflinching. So, am I to understand that this is going to be a fight? If so, you can begin at any time, he said, pressing his glasses a little tighter to his face. You know what? I don't care what you're doing here. I don't like your attitude. So you know what? I don't think you're going to be going anywhere, he said as his body began to distend, getting larger, his bones seeming to shudder and pop out of place, his skin growing rapid, long fur, a thick brown coat of fur before long had enveloped his entire form, a long snout emerging, razor-sharp teeth, large, piercing blue eyes, and a short, somewhat fluffy tail beginning to sway back and forth as he completely changed into a wolf, around 7, maybe 7.5 foot tall, his clothes barely clinging to his body, as if the seams could give at any moment. And in a moment he began to lunge, moving rapidly towards Hamilton, growling and snarling. But just as rapidly as he began to move towards Hamilton, in fact, probably even faster, something shot out of Hamilton. At first it seemed like an illusion, a flash of vibrant light, a mixture of green and white, like wisps of smoke or steam, firing out like an arrow, not really having any form or substance to them. But in a flash, that all changed, as a green and white specter formed from that blaze of energy. It was horrifying in appearance. Long, spectral white hair that seemed to drift in a non-existent breeze, floating around its head. Its body seemed withered, frail, slight, but extended far longer than any humans would be. It had no legs to speak of, only a long, tattered sort of cloak that formed the bottom half of its body. That, too, simply drifting, flowing as it moved. And on the ends of its arms, long, distended fingers, those two looking withered, but with what appeared to be razor-sharp nails at the end of them. Its face looked like the face of a corpse, like a body that had been placed in the ground and dug up. It had no physical eyes, just a sunken, gaunt face, skin appearing to cling to the bones, with green glowing beads of light peering out from the cavities, and rows of razor-sharp teeth filling its seemingly undead mouth, spectral saliva running from it. Without any hesitation whatsoever, the specter lunged out right back at the wolf. For a moment he was stunned, beginning to stop in his tracks, trying to pull to a halt, but not fast enough, as the spectral hands of the entity reached inside of it, boring their way into the wolf's body. But they didn't tear a hole inside of him. No, they simply passed right through his form, through his clothing, through his skin. And in the moment the wolf stopped, Fausta couldn't believe her eyes. This spectral entity now hovering over him, hands buried into his chest. It was as if it had a hold of something. And in that moment, the specter began to lift the wolf from the ground, his hands still buried in his chest, as if his internal organs were the source that he was grabbing hold of, using to lift him off the ground. The wolf was panicking, trying to slash and bite away at the specter. From the looks of it, it seemed like the wolf was having trouble breathing, like he was in a great deal of pain. But all of his attacks seemed to find no purchase whatsoever, passing directly through the entity, causing its form to shift somewhat, but not having any actual impact. As the wolf began to gag, choking up some bile fluid. It looked like a mixture of red, like blood, but there was also something else mixed in with it. A green glowing fluid that he began to gag up in large amounts with the blood, as the spectral entity that had a grasp on him opened its mouth filled with those razor-sharp teeth, and a long, extremely long tongue seemed to pour out of its mouth, slowly whipping about, as some horrifying sound was being emitted from this ghostly spectral form, and green pulsating energy began to flow from the wolf into the specter. And as it did, the specter grew more vibrant. Its form seemed to strengthen, seeming even more solid, as the wolf's green eyes went pale white, and he began to slowly stop struggling, eventually no longer moving at all, as its form began to wither away, something that Fausta had seen before. Muscles seeming to dissipate down to nothing, skin and fur starting to cling to the bones, and in only a few moments, the entire wolf had shriveled down to nothing at all. As the specter's hands seemed to release the form from inside, the body falling to the ground, only a few feet, but in that few feet, it picked up enough speed so that when it hit, it crumbled, shattering into countless pieces, ashes that seemed to smoke. Inside the ashes, bones, what appeared to be the bones of a long dead wolf. In the moment, Fausta was worried that the other wolves might attack, but frankly, she was having a hard time not staring at this display, her eyes nearly glued to it. She managed to pull them away for a moment to look at what the others were doing, only to find that all of them were standing there in horror. They looked terrified, like they had just seen the most horrifying thing that they had ever experienced. Without any words, they began to back away, still eyes locked on this green and white glowing specter afloat, about 5 feet off of the ground, its long tongue whipping about for a moment as it began to look around. And without any warning or notice, all of the others turned, running away rapidly, looks of panic and terror on their face, darting off into the woods, hoping to escape, hoping that they wouldn't be the next. Hamilton turned around, looking from place to place as all of the wolves seemed to dart off into the woods, no longer seeming as if they wanted a fight. Well, that was boring. And here I expected them to actually offer a challenge, to make this a little bit exciting. But they were all cowards. They didn't even bother trying. It's really a shame they weren't stronger. Werewolves actually possess a great deal of spiritual power. If any of them actually had some measure of control over it, then they would have actually been able to hurt me. But no, they were all weak. What a waste. Foster looked over at Hamilton for a moment, and then back to the specter still floating in the air, its tongue beginning to retract back into its head, before looking back to Hamilton. So it's true. The rumors that I heard about wraiths. Oh, rumors, Hamilton replied. And what rumors would those be? That wraiths aren't like other beings. That you're both living and dead simultaneously. A living body occupied by a dead soul, able to separate the two at will. To be a vengeful spirit on command. But from the way I had heard it, the body wouldn't be able to move around or do anything while the ghost was out. But you don't seem to be having any trouble with it at all. No, Hamilton replied. In fact, I'm rather surprised that you knew that little bit of information. But it's not completely accurate. It is accurate, but only for exceptionally young wraith. Once you hit 150, maybe 200, depending on the individual, you leave behind the necessity to remain inactive while your specter is out. In actuality, that specter you see is my soul. Us wraiths aren't bound by the same rules that normal living beings are. Normally, a living being has their soul tethered to their physical form. The two basically inseparable, at least not with any measure of safety, with the only caveat being those with the ability to go on spirit walks, to leave their physical form. But, much like the rumors that you've heard of, this is a dreamlike state for them. Their consciousness leaves along with their spirit, and their body remains inactive. Wraiths, once they reach a certain point, are under no such restrictions. My soul is not alive and thus not tethered to my living form. It is unbound and can go wherever I wish it, travel far outside of my realm of sight or sound. If I wished it, I could simply send my specter on a hunt. It could travel to basically anywhere in the world, so long as it's on the same plane of existence, within the same realm. There are no limitations on distance. My soul and my body can function completely separately, one having no need for the other's presence, so long as both exist. There is a time limit, of course, which is somewhat tedious. After a few days, my soul will have to return to my body. It, of course, always knows where I am, and can locate me easily. But luckily enough, that timeline can be extended. The wraith needs to return to my body in order to recharge, or eventually it will dissipate, losing its spiritual force and energy. But if it feeds, this rejuvenates its energy. Meaning, so long as there is enough for it to eat, my soul can wander as long as it wants, making the timeline disappear altogether. And I assure you, my soul is more than capable of fending for itself. As you can see, Hamilton said, adjusting his glasses for a moment, as the floating specter darted back towards his form, disappearing into his body.